So I might make a start. Welcome to the first webinar for Business and Corporations Law. Great to see everyone online. It was awesome to see the introductions so far. It was great to see a great range of different backgrounds and I guess a lot of people doing a lot of amazing things. So thank you for coming along. The purpose of tonight is just to quickly go through the content, or I guess the structure of this course, and to give you an opportunity to raise any questions that you might have as we go through. It's quite a depth content in the 12 weeks, and a lot of it is covered quite quickly. So if you ever do raise a situation where you have questions, please do not hesitate to email me. I'll always try and get back to you within the 48 hours. And of course, always happy to have a conversation over the phone if that's what's preferred. So I thought we'd just have a quick look at this Collaborate Ultra and how it works. It's got some really cool functionality. One of these things is that it enables you as participants to draw on the slides as well. So I thought we'd have this as an example. At the top of your screen, you should be able to see some different, I guess, icons, and one of them is a pencil. If you click on that pencil and a colour, you can then draw where in the world you are. So if you want to have a go at just drawing or a circle or a square in terms of what state you might be located in, or what city. And one thing you can do with this is, if we're moving through the slides and you wanted me to talk about something in particular, you could circle it and I can come to it. Other than, of course, the other functionalities, such as the chat function, which allows you to do all sorts of cool things as well with some smiley faces, and of course, if you have questions there. There's also additional functionality at the bottom where you can see something called My Status and Settings. In My Status and Settings, it allows you to quickly provide feedback. So for example, we might ask a question around whether you are ready for us to move on to the next section. You could say happy or sad. So if everyone's saying sad, it means that I know that we should go over that content in a little bit more detail. But if you're happy, the situation, you can turn your status to happy. So maybe if you'd be able to find that, if you're happy for us to continue, click on that happy icon. Awesome, Hamid's found it. Awesome. Got a few more. And another thing we can do with this throughout the semester is there's some polling options as well. So we can do some quizzes and whatnot through this functionality. So just before I move on, just a quick introduction to myself. So I'm Nick Pappen and I'll be your facilitator for the semester. And I understand this is an online class, so we'll be hopefully engaging in these webinars on a fortnightly basis. And what these webinars are designed to do is to support the main Thursday evening in Melbourne. So I do invite anyone who is in Melbourne, either just on a trip or whether they live there locally, they are always welcome to attend those sessions in the city. But what I'll generally do is I'll record that on a Thursday, and then the lecture content should be up usually by the end of the weekend. And then these webinars are to support that content. And what I hope to do in these webinars is to use them more as an opportunity to go through actual legal problems that you might see on your assessment tasks. So I want to use it as more of a practical opportunity rather than going through the content. But of course, that's what the lecture recordings will do. So a bit about myself. I am a lawyer, having practiced at RMIT, so that's where my practice is. And I'm also undertaking a PhD with a focus on fraud in stuff really interesting. But as way of background, I've largely practiced in areas such as privacy and freedom of information, defence trade, and legislative compliance. If you ever need to contact me at all, my email is there, so nicholas.pappen@RMIT. Always feel free to email me. I'll always respond to your questions. And some of them are very interesting and thought-provoking. So if you've got any questions at all, do not hesitate to contact me. Now, I can see a lot of you have already participated on the, I guess, the discussion board. But if you haven't, jump on there and add your introduction. It's great for, I guess, the class as a cohort to get to know everyone. And I hope that you guys can engage with each other outside of these webinars and I guess create study groups if you're local. I can see that a few of you are located in Sydney. Maybe there's an opportunity for you to have a study group. But this introduction post is a great opportunity to start that conversation. Now, before we get into the content, I guess, of the subject itself, did anyone have any burning questions or anything that they'd like to raise at this stage? If you're happy for us to continue, we can just do our little happy faces. Awesome. So business and corporations law, on the screen at the moment, what we've got is our course learning outcomes. So this is what we expect students to gain an understanding of through completion of this subject. So the assessment tasks are geared towards meeting these course learning outcomes. Now, I won't go through them in a lot of detail now, but they are available on the course guide. And I just recommend you have a read of the course guide because that sets out pretty much everything that we'll be doing through the semester, including the assessment tasks, the weekly schedule and readings. You can think of the course guide as a bit of a contract between myself and you guys in terms of how the course will be delivered. And that's reflective, hopefully, of what we will do. So the subject is broken down into 4 different areas. And the first one we will start on this week, and that's the Australian legal system. Now, that lecture is to really introduce the concepts of the legal system that we operate in. And it's incredibly important as practitioners to have a strong grounding or understanding of the legal framework. It doesn't matter what role you work in, you will always have some exposure to legislation or regulation or the law and how it operates. So this week we're going to history and how our system is structured. Then next week we move on to what I think students find the most interesting of the topics, and that being torts or negligence. So we can think of someone falling over in the supermarket. Maybe they've slipped on a grape that is on the floor. They may then sue the supermarket for negligence. That's the type of stories that we'll see in that section. But we'll also use the torts and negligence lecture as an opportunity to learn or cover how we solve legal problems generally. Now, that's an incredibly important topic in terms of your research assignment and also your final exam, because what we're going to go through there is that technique of how we approach them. So I really suggest, or I strongly encourage that the next webinar that we hold, which will be in a fortnight, I strongly encourage that you attend that because it will go through that foundation of legal problem solving, which will give up the rest of the stuff. So after those first 2 weeks, they'll go very quickly. A lot of content in 2 weeks. We move on to the concept of contract law. Now, that's a 4-week window for contract law, but I should stress that we are doing a very condensed version. In practice in law school, contract law was spread over 2 semesters. So you can imagine how much content we could do, but what we'll do is introduce the key concepts of contract law, how they're formed, how they, I guess, are enforced, and also how they come to an end. So we'll have a really quick, but I guess broad look at contract law. And the topics from week 2 to week 6 are incredibly important for your research assignment. So that's really what the research assignment topics will be on. And then after contract law, we start to look at the concepts of company law and how governed internally and externally, and of course how they can come to an end in either a winding up process or a liquidation, as we usually see in the media. A good example is the recent Max Brenner voluntary administration. For anyone that's enjoyed Max Brenner, they went through a voluntary administration. It's been bought out by someone else, but it's a good example of the company structure and how it can operate in practice. Then we'll reserve the last week for revision and preparing for the final exam. So from that perspective, I'm hoping that we can have these webinars on a fortnightly basis to cover this content from a couple of weeks before. So moving on to the most important part of the course, and that being assessment, because we all want you to do really well and pass. So we've got 3 assessment tasks. The first being the multiple choice test. Now the multiple choice test is worth 10% of your overall grade, and what it is it's 20 questions of varying difficulty based on the topic 1 content. So if we go back to our schedule, your first assessment task, being the multiple choice quiz, is just going to cover the Australian legal system, or the stuff that we are covering this week. The MCQ will take place at the end of week 3, so you do have a bit of time to get through the reading and prepare. And what that quiz is it's 60 minutes, 20 multiple choice questions. We will go over the types of questions that you can expect in more detail in our next webinar in the fortnight in preparation for that quiz. But the test opens on the 23rd of March, so Friday night, and then it closes on the Sunday at 11:59 p.m. So you'll have the whole weekend to complete the quiz. But in saying that, once you commence the quiz, you'll only have 1 hour to complete it. So although you can start at any time in the weekend, it's really important that you do reserve an allocated time for you to complete that quiz uninterrupted. Because once you press go, that 60-minute clock will start. And unfortunately, when that expires, your submission will just be how that stands at that time. So that's 10% of your marks. Really good opportunity to get some early runs on the board. Students usually perform quite well on that MCQ. The average marks that we see are about 75 to 80%. So a good opportunity to get a good start. The second assessment task is the research assignment. Now that's a 3,000 word paper that's worth grade. Research assignment is broken into 3 parts, and I'll explain what those 3 parts are in more detail as we go through. But you'll have an opportunity as part of that research assignment to submit a draft or a partial draft for feedback prior to submitting the final submission. I strongly encourage that you do participate in that feedback process, because the students that do usually perform really, really well. Then we move on to the final exam. That's worth 50%. It's a 2-hour exam, written exam, that is undertaken as part of the university exam period. That's, from my understanding, between the 10th of June and the 28th of June. Now those exams are usually held during the day or daytime hours. So as online students, it's important to just note that you may have a requirement to attend during the day on a work day. So just keep that in mind as you plan moving forward. So the process we operate under in terms of our learning is we provide as much feedback as we can. So all through those assessment tasks, you'll be given feedback. In the multiple choice quiz, you get automatic feedback in terms of how you went. But in terms of the research assignment, what we do is we provide very targeted, specific feedback on your submissions, whether that is part of a feed forward or whether that's part of the final submission. Now, from our perspective, we aim to get all feedback back to you within 2 weeks, except for the exam, which you don't necessarily receive the feedback, but you'll receive a final grade as part of your results being released. But in the interim, I also encourage you to have a go at the practice questions that are published each week under the learning activities. And I also give you the opportunity to submit any written work that you might do around those practice questions to myself, and I can then give you some feedback on how you're going with those. So take that up if you do have the time to complete those learning activities and complete a written submission, because that feedback can be a really valuable tool in terms of how you go about structuring your assessment task as they come. So another thing to note with our assessment tasks is that they're all open book. So the MCQ you can do from anywhere. We're not going to control or invigilate that, so you can do that from home. But I stress that don't rely solely on the textbook. The book is in terms of content, but in terms of finding the information that you need quickly when you're under exam time pressure, it's sometimes not that easy. So I always encourage that you have your own notes that you are able to access quickly, that you are able to navigate quickly, and that you can use in a test environment. The lecture slides, which will be published weekly, are useful. They're a good starting point, but I always recommend that you do write your own notes around that. Now, when it comes to the final exam, it's quite useful to have these notes, because what you can start to do as we look at particularly company law is you can draft part of your answers in advance. Now, what I mean by that is when we look at the legal problem-solving techniques, require a description of legal rules as part of your application of those legal rules. So let's say you need to address a negligence question. Someone's fallen over in that supermarket. What you'll need to show me in your answer is that you know the legal rules around what happens when someone falls over in the supermarket. So a legal rule could be, did the supermarket owe a duty of care? So in your notes, you could have a description of what a duty of care under the law is. Now, why that's useful is that when you're in the exam environment, you can just pull your notes out and copy the rule out word for word without even having to think. So you can save so much time by having these pre-drafted rules. And as we go through the semester, we'll point out what these rules are, and we'll point out how you could articulate them. So we will work on that. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that having your own notes in a written form is invaluable. If you do business law, you know, you can see some examples of students in the past. They might be selling their notes. Now, I'm not saying that you should buy them, because I don't know the quality of them or whether they're even correct, but you could use them as an example of how you could set your notes out, or how other students have set their notes out. Now, with the MCQ, I'm sure you've all undertaken similar tests in the past. You'll be able to see quickly that some of the answers just are clearly incorrect. But one thing that I think a lot of students have difficulty is when there's circumstances where it appears to be more than one correct answer. Now, what we're looking for is obviously the most correct answer, and in an MCQ environment, the most correct answer is generally the correct answer. But I think what I should stress in law is that when we get to the research assignment and the final exam, is that there's no thing very unusual, particularly where backgrounds are from maths or science, or even economics or some of the business subjects. But what we're really looking for in a legal subject is good arguments. So although I might have a sample answer of how I think a question should be answered or how a law should be applied, what we're really looking for in this course is a good argument or a demonstration that you understand the law with the application. Now, sometimes your application might be different to what I would have seen as an answer.
But if you're able to persuade me in not necessarily believing, but going, yeah, I can completely see how you've applied that, you can still get full marks. So what we're really looking at is good arguments, not right answers. But for the MCQ, unfortunately, we are looking for correct answers there. You can use the internet while you're doing your MCQ, but just know that your time limit may not permit a search that is actually useful. The other thing is that the Australian legal system as a topic is so broad that if you Google something like that's not specific, a theory, for example, it can be very difficult to sift through what Google returns. Notwithstanding that the results could apply to a completely different jurisdiction. I should note that the Australian and British jurisdictions are quite similar, but they may be some distinguishing factors that mean that Google gives you the wrong answer. Now, I was talking about the research assignment just briefly before. As I was saying, we give you this opportunity to submit a feed forward, just so that it's in your calendar. Feed forward is the 4th of April. Now, the feed forward will give you the opportunity to submit a draft of the first question. So the research assignment will be broken down into 3 parts. We're going to give you the opportunity to submit for feed forward on the first part, which is generally a legal scenario type question. Really utilize that because it will put you in such a great position for the rest of your research assignment and the exam. One thing I should note, research and academic integrity is incredibly important. Plagiarism is a very serious thing. So copying or allowing another person to copy your work is quite serious. So although it's very tempting to just do types of text or or a website, it's not good practice. Now you could technically reference it, and academically that's okay, so long as you tell me where that content came from, but it's always not a good look, and you're probably not going to get full marks if it's just copied. But what academic integrity is really worried about is a circumstance where you've copied that text and you haven't referenced it accordingly, and you've tried to pass it off as your own. Now, we use Turnitin as a submission tool. So what Turnitin is a text matching application or software, you can call it. And what that does is it matches your work against the database of all this other work that's been submitted by students all around the world. Now, even though you might get a high text matching index, it doesn't mean plagiarized. Students that have significant reference lists, and I like significant reference lists because it shows that you have gone out and looked at the body of literature, they'll come up as matched. So I've seen students with 50% matches, but it's all been their reference list. What I'm more concerned about is when I see chunks of text come up as highlighted, and as we go and through experience, we investigate them in more detail. So don't copy, don't allow other students to copy, and to put it into, I guess, a real term around your professional practice, it can impact on your ability to practice in your profession. So if you've got plagiarism on your record, it could mean that you may not be admitted as an accountant or through the CPA or the like. I know for lawyers, if you've got plagiarism on your account, you have to show cause with the admitted. It can result in people not being able to practice. So don't put yourself in that position. Good thing about this subject is we don't have a bell curve. So your marks are your marks. If you get 100%, you get 100%. The student next to you gets 85%, they get 85%. We're not going to skew any data. There's not going to be any adjustments to your marks. So just know that
the marks that you get is what you'll get at the end of the semester. So success in this subject, as I was saying at the start, it is a lot of content and that can be quite overwhelming. So it's really important that you stay on top of the readings and also stay on top of the lecture content and these webinars if you're able to attend. Always make summaries and give a go, or have a go at the practice questions on campus. No better way of preparing for the assessment than going through those practice questions. As a way of a hint, there's only so many ways we can word, or only so many ways we can draft problem questions. So if you go through enough practice questions, chances are you'll start to see similarities in the way that we provide questions of assessment, for example, and you'll have techniques and you'll have ways of responding to that already prepared through your practice. So I can't stress enough, practice, practice, practice. If you're having any difficulties in understanding any of the concepts, or if you're writing something and you're not quite understanding how that's working, please ask. This is what we're here for. Although we're an online cohort, I'm always here to support you and provide a response to any questions that you might have. That's my job, to help you guys get through this subject. I'm not going to say as easily as possible, because it is a master's level subject that is based on quite a difficult content in terms of the legal stuff can be quite new to some students. But I'm here to support you get through this. I guess you can say we're the BizCorps team. The research assignment I'm anticipating will be ready by the end of week 3. One part of the question is going to be actually a video. So I'm just preparing that as we speak, in terms of, instead of the question being in written form, one of the questions will be a video that you guys watch. It'll be a simulated legal interview type of activity of a client and a lawyer, and your job will be to listen to that interview and pick out the legal issues that you need to talk about, and then you'll draft a memorandum of advice based on some research that you'll have to undertake. Different to just the standard written questions, but obviously it's new for a lot of students. So what we'll do is we'll get feedback at the end of that process to see whether it's something that you guys enjoyed or whether it made it more difficult to complete the assessment. The other 2 parts of the research assignment will be written questions. Just before we keep moving on, has anyone got any questions about the assessment task so far? You can either pop them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I can put your microphone on. Is everyone feeling okay about the semester? I know it can sound a bit scary, but the question, the exam being open book, I can confirm that the exam is open book, and what that means is that you can take any written materials into the exam you like. That includes textbooks, your notes, the lecture slides. The only thing you can't take into the exam is electronic devices, but you can take a non-scientific calculator, so just a basic calculator. I do recommend that you do have a calculator for the exam, just a $2 or $5 one from the news agency, because there will be some calculations that you'll have to work out. But you can have as many textbooks as you like. No worries. In saying that, open book exams, sometimes you don't get an opportunity to look too much because it's a long time for an exam. So it's really important that you have good notes. Any other questions about the assessment? A few more typing. So just a question about example exams. So towards the end of the semester, usually around weeks 10, 11 and 12, we spend a lot of time practicing past exams and techniques to respond to those exams. So we have a really strong focus on preparation in those last 3 weeks. And in fact, the revision lecture will just be on exams. And what we'll do as an online cohort, we'll have a special revision session like this, set up to go through exam questions. And obviously, if you can do the practice exams and you can prepare responses to those practice exams, you're pretty much ready to go for the final. I can recommend taking your practice exams to the exam. Because as I said, when you start writing, when we'll look at this in week 2, but when you start looking at legal problem solving and how we go through the process, if you've got half of the process already drafted in a like question, because like I said, you can only write these questions in so many ways, then you've already got something to put on your paper at the end of the semester. How's everyone feeling? Happy to move on? Or any other questions? Do our little happy faces if we're good to keep going. Awesome, got a thumbs up. So on the screen now, we've got the recommended textbook. This is Business and Corporations Law by Fitzpatrick Symes. And this textbook has been specifically drafted for your CPA requirements. So if you're going to do CPA, they've got these particular areas that you need to cover off on. And this textbook covers off on that business and corporations law, your legal part of that in detail. So it has everything to do with the contract and the company law stuff. To be honest, it's a bit light on when it comes to negligence. So we will have a lot more online for week 2. The rest of the content on contract law, company law, and even the Australian legal system, it's a good resource to have. Now, it's only recommended because it is a good textbook, but you can get by without it if you are supplementing your reading with other resources. Now, I'll publish on Canvas resources that I find are good, and those resources generally can be accessed online, such as through the RMIT library. But I still recommend, if you've got the opportunity to purchase this textbook that's on the screen. There's a significant second-hand market now, so you might be able to pick it up a lot cheaper. I think it's unfortunately $125 brand new from LexisNexis, who's the publisher, but you might be able to find a second-hand copy. Now, each week on Canvas, we'll publish slides, resources as a way of reading, and any journal or news articles that I think are useful. I'll also publish some discussion posts throughout the semester that I hope that you're able to participate in. So it might be something that is happening in contemporary law or a case that's just finished, and we'll invite some discussion in terms of how we think that applies to us as a cohort. I guess we can call them case studies. And also I'll publish some various websites to explore. As we get to the research assignment, I'll publish things that I think are useful as a starting point. So I won't do all your research for you, but I'll put up some key cases that I think you should draw your attention to, and that will allow you to explore in more detail. Sometimes it's just finding the first key case, and then that case will reference a bunch of other resources that you use. So your textbook can help. The other thing that I think is really important that is through the semester that you either have access to electronically or you print out sections of the legislation that we refer to. Now, contract law is largely case law, and we'll explain what that is in this week's lecture in more detail, but it predominantly means that it's law that's made by judges in cases that are heard. So you might think of two parties having a dispute, then the court will hear that dispute, and then that decision from that dispute establishes what we call a precedent, and that precedent is then considered a law if it's held by a significantly higher court. But where we have legislation, and you will see it in contract, we'll have a lot of sections out of the Corporations Act. I strongly recommend that you have a copy of those sections in your exam. I wouldn't take the whole Corporations Act. That thing is really, really big. We're talking over thousands of sections. But for us, we might have 20 to 30 key sections that I recommend that you print out and have with you. Having your notes in a well-organized fashion is really important. I can't stress that enough. And creating something that you can use. Some students prefer the use or like the use of mind maps, or having these post-it notes everywhere. You've all seen the students with those type of folios. If that works for you, definitely start preparing that early and having that capture all the content throughout the semester. And of course, use the lecture slides. They're a good start. So path to success, students in the online cohorts are usually perform quite well in this subject. So yes, it is something that's not easy. Law can be quite a daunting topic, particularly for students who haven't done something like this before. And for a lot of you, I understand this might be your first exposure even to the Australian legal system. But if you actively participate in these webinars, if you keep up to date with the lecture recordings, and you do those practice questions, I can't stress enough, those practice questions are incredibly important, you can do really well in this subject. Give yourself every opportunity to succeed by attempting those scenarios. And again, I referenced before, but I'll give you the opportunity to submit your responses for feedback. Now, depending on how complicated things are, it might take me a few days to respond with that feedback, but I'll try and get back to you as quickly as possible. So I guess that's important to note that for me, lecturing is a casual thing, so a sessional thing. So I actually work full-time, like many of you guys. But I always try and get back to you as soon as I can when time permits. That was just a quick slide on the exam. Just making sure you have your notes together. Now, it is just a 2-hour exam, and we'll talk about the exam in more detail as we get to the end of the subject, but it really is just 2.5 minutes per mark, so it's quite a quick assessment task. Probably the key thing from the exam is students not finishing it. That's probably the mark. So that's something to think about as we move forward. We'll talk about that in a lot more detail towards the second half of the course. Now, you've probably had an opportunity to look at Canvas, or at least go through it in some brief detail. Here's just a really brief overview of how it's set out. Announcements are something that we release on a weekly basis, and that's our communications about the course or the subject, including whether there's something new that's being published on Canvas, or whether there's recordings available to you, and also when there's something that's important that you should know. Now, I encourage that you regularly check those announcements because it has content that is very relevant to you. As soon as the research assignment is available, you'll get an announcement, so you'll be able to download it. If there's something that there'll be an announcement to fix that. But that's really our communication channel to all of you. I also recommend that you have a look at the course syllabus if you haven't already. That spells out in great detail the structure of the semester, when everything's going to happen, and also the assessment tasks and their weighting. So definitely have a look at that syllabus, maybe print off the course guide, have it with you, so you can keep on top of all the content. There's also an assignments tab, so that's where the assignment tasks will be posted, and it's also where your assignments will be submitted. So there'll be a separate assignments tab for the feed forward process and a separate one for the final submission. And then you'll see that the structure of the Canvas is set out in modules, and our modules are just broken down into the weeks. So week 1, the Australian legal system, week 2, through to the end. There's also a discussion board that enables you to raise any questions that you might have about that particular week. That's a good place to raise any questions you might have that you find would be useful for other students in the cohort. However, if you've got something a little bit more personal, maybe you need an extension, or you wanted to discuss something that is more private, please feel free to email me. Sometimes it's probably more appropriate to do that, but the discussion boards are there for your use. Also, if you're seeing a student raise a question on the discussion board that you know the answer to, feel free to respond to them. It's great to see our cohort operate in that way and engage with each other, because some of the people we study with today might be people that we work with in practice and in the future, and it's quite amazing what our networks can do for us. In terms of this, what I try to do is upload the slides on the weekend before that week, ahead of the lecture content, and then I'll have a face-to-face lecture on the Thursdays that if you're in Melbourne you're welcome to attend. Those lectures are 6:30 to 9:30 on a Thursday in the CBD. If you're interested in attending those, please send me an email and I'll send you the building address. But what I'll do is I'll record that lecture and then I'll publish that on Canvas usually within 48 hours, but it's likely to be a Saturday or a Sunday, and then you're able to watch that lecture content. It's just a bit unfortunate that it'll be later in the week, so you might feel like you're a week out of kilter, but that will be okay because we'll catch up at the end in terms of that exam revision period. And then what we'll do is be just me talking at you like tonight's introductory session. It will be us having an opportunity to go through those problem questions in some detail. So that's how the semester will work. There's also some really good resources available on the RMIT website. We've got this thing called a learning lab. These slides are also published under your week 1 materials. So if you wanted to check out the Learning Lab, that hyperlink will work for you in that presentation. But that's a really good place to go and have a look at some law resources. There's a few walk through scenarios in relation to contract law, company law and negligence that I think are really good and a great starting point to see how we can structure our legal problem solving responses. From reading the question all the way through to how you can prepare an answer and respond to that. We will do that in much more detail in class, but I do recommend having a look through those modules because they give you a good introduction to that process. And it also covers content or topics that we look at in our class materials. The first one being negligence and contract law. Now, negligence and contract law will be on your research assignment, so I think these are good tools for preparing for that. There's also some writing and study skills that you may find of use. So just, I guess, techniques on writing and responding to assessments generally. They're not focused on legal or law type material, like the business law, contract law stuff that is referenced here. But they are useful in some of your general academic writing skills. Now, resources are on that Learning Lab page. I think they're somewhere down here. So sorry, they're not on the picture. Another thing I can point out is this excellent, I guess, it's not a function, but it's something that the university offers you free of charge, which is this assignment feedback. Now, what that allows you to do is you can submit your assignment for online feedback from, I guess, a company that the university is engaged to look at that. So if you have an assignment that's predominantly drafted, so they won't just look at a draft, you have to have something that's quite substantial. They can give you feedback on your grammar, your structuring, your spelling. They won't give you feedback on the content or your content, legal academics, but it is a good way of getting good feedback on your structuring and your grammar and things like that. So take advantage of that. It's free. I think you just need your RMIT login to access that, and I do recommend that as part of your assignment submission process, maybe submitting to that, because why not? It's free. The feedback that I provide you is more in relation to the content and the substantive law and how you're approaching that, whereas the feedback I'm pointing out here is more to do with your structuring and spelling and things like that. So that brings us to the end of the session. I hope that provided a good overview of what we're to expect throughout the semester. It's now an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have about the course content, any concerns that you may have, anything at all. So just a question about the Corporations Act, because I was recommending before that you have printout of sections from that Corporations Act. So you can get access to it online. Now, my favourite website is a website called Ostly. I can type it up in here. So it's spelled, sorry, I'll just get a better colour. Ostly, with 2 I's. And it's a really good search database for legislation. So you can use that to search for Corporations Act, and it should index it for you so that you can just go to section 180, for example. Otherwise, you can get the full version of that. I'll also publish a link in Canvas to any acts that I think are really useful for us, and Corps Act is definitely one of them. You can access through the library as well. So they're free to access those acts. I definitely don't recommend printing the whole Corporations Act, though. It's very big, and we don't need all that content. So a question about sections. So what we'll do as we go through the semester, I'll point out the sections that I think are important. They'll be definitely in the slides in terms of referenced, and if they're referenced in the slides, I reckon you probably should print them as well. But definitely, I'll tell you what sections to print. Assessment. Feel free, any questions you might have. The next webinar, I'm hoping to prepare a schedule in the coming days in terms of when they'll be held. I'll rotate the days and the time to give everyone an opportunity to attend, because I understand that a lot of you have fairly significant commitments with family and work, and it's not always easy to jump online and
participate in these type of forums. So I'll have a rolling schedule that I'll post online. End of week 2, start of week 3, and what we'll use that webinar to do or to focus on will be the legal problem solving skills in terms of negligence. And I think we'll also do a really quick type of revision session on topic 1 in preparation for the multiple choice quiz. So we use it as a way of preparing for the MCQ, but also we'll have some legal problem solving in there as well. Now, in terms of preparing for the MCQ, there's also these knowledge checks published each week. So the week 1 knowledge check is a bank of 30 questions relating to topic 1. I think that's a great way of practicing the MCQ, and it's a good way of getting an example of the types of questions that you can expect to see. You can do it anytime you like. You'll get immediate feedback on that in terms of how you did, and I can't stress enough that that's a really good way of getting ready for the MCQ and 10% of the marks for the subject. Feel free also, if you wanted, to use a microphone to ask questions, because that raise the hand function. So a question in relation to the Constitution. Do you need to print the Constitution? Probably not. There are sections around how the Constitution operates, the key principles, and also the powers and how they're distributed in the Constitution. We'll look at that in great detail this week, in this week's lecture. From my perspective, you probably don't need to print the Constitution, but just know where the sections are in your textbook or in a textbook that you have access to. But as Patricia says, you can get access to it. Well, it doesn't hurt to have a copy. The Constitution is an interesting, it's the most important law in our legal system, so it kind of sets the framework for everything that we talk about. So it's a very important piece of legislation, and we'll go through that in detail this week. It sets up our federation and how that works. Just having a few more typing. If you want your microphone on, I'm happy to turn that on as well. If you want to have a chat with each other as well. Good question, Patricia. Just raising a question in terms of content and what we should focus on. Other areas we don't have to stress trying to remember, and just reading for background. The first chapter, which is on the Australian legal system, there's a lot of stuff on history. Now, it's good to understand the history because, you know, a couple of questions might come up on the MCQ in terms of key events, but from my perspective, you probably don't need to have a rote memory of the history, just know where it is. As we move through the course, post MCQ, the topic 1 is not really accessible on anything else. Yes, it will build your skills for the rest of the assessment in understanding how the system works, but we won't have any specific questions on it. Trying to think of other topics. It's hard to say, but I think the first week's probably mostly background, other than your MCQ stuff. What I'll try to do in the lecture stuff, when you get an opportunity to watch the lectures, I will emphasise or put focus on things that I believe are really key. And I'd suggest that if I'm putting emphasis on something, that's a focus area. If I've just gleaned over it in the lecture or even in the webinars, it is probably something that's not as important for your assessment. And in our webinars, what we'll do is we'll focus on the stuff that's really important. Now, I have a lot of content under the question, but unfortunately, it's hard to put a finger on exactly what will be background. But I'll try my best to focus throughout the semester. Sorry, no, that was a bit of a roundabout answer. But from my perspective, definitely read the first chapter for the MCQ. I think that's really important. Negligence, we won't have much from the textbook. In negligence, the key content is the rules, and we'll go through the rules in great detail. Any other question, guys? How do we feel? Okay. Do a little poll. Yes, no. These sessions are very flexible, so feel free to come and go as you please. I've gone through all the content that I have. Happy to hang around and respond to any questions that you may have. But if you've got everything that you feel you need for now, I guess have a great, we're Tuesday night, and the rest of the week. There's a lecture this Thursday, so I'll hopefully get that content up pretty quickly for week 1. And of course, if you ever need a question, feel free to reach out. I've got one person saying no on the quiz, on the poll, so if there's anything I can do to help you feel better, pop comments or send me an email. We're here to get you through. Now, I find this topic really fun, and I think if you come at it with that lens that it can have such an impact on your approach professionally and also day-to-day activities. So when we go through negligence, for example, you'll see so many examples that you can relate to. And then when we're in contracts and company law, you'll probably see some examples that you see in your day-to-day work. And I think that can make the content really interesting and useful. And in terms of the difficulty, a lot of students do really well at this subject. I know there's a lot of content, but I think for the most part, those that go through it in a methodical way and approach the practice questions do well. So the reading can be overwhelming. If you're a bit like me at study, I was very late notice. I guess from that perspective, make sure you read chapter 1 for the MCQ. The chapters on
negligence and contract law can probably be explored in greater detail for the research assignment if you don't have a lot of time. Now, I say that though with some hesitancy because if you're reading the content before the lectures, you'll get a lot more out of that lecture. It'll make a lot more sense. But I understand we're all time pressures, so if you need to cram, week 1 you need to cram before week 3, week 2 to week 6 you need to cram before the research assignment, and then obviously the rest of the law is week 6 to 12 for the exam. The final exam will be predominantly on company law. Good question, and there's no backtracking. Feel free to ask any questions about the course. When we talk about calculators in the exam, because you will be calculating the amount of money that's left over in an insolvency process. So that could be fractions or percentages. You can't take a calculator. I've got to be careful because I might not know the difference between a programmable or scientific calculator, but you can't take one in like a graphics calculator, one that can be programmed to, I'm not sure why they're banned actually, but I through them, I'm not sure, but you have to take just a really basic calculator. The ones that I recommend are those really, really cheap ones from the news agencies, and then you know you're not going to get into any trouble at all, because the last thing you want is to be in the exam environment and the invigilator says to you, sorry, you can't use that calculator, and then you're trying to calculate 32% of $92,000. It's just impossible. Well, actually, it's probably not impossible, but I know I can't calculate that. So it's just safe. Just have something that's really basic. You could do it sometimes if you're familiar with that calculator and how it operates, than just a basic one. I'm not sure how the exams work for OUA, but I know in the straight RMIT cohorts that I think they've banned bags in the room and mobiles and things like that. So everything has to be left outside. But permitted devices, such as your calculator, can be brought in. So Patricia's talking about the financial calculator. That's something I'm not familiar with, but they're most likely okay. When it comes closer to the exam, I'll get some more details and provide some more definitive advice that you can rely on, because at the moment I'm not being very reliable. Awesome. Any other questions that anyone has? Did you find this session useful? Any feedback's always welcome. If there's anything that obviously this was a bit of an introductory session, but if you find this useful, push ahead. We're going to on a fortnightly basis, but I might chuck in some few revision type sessions if you find these useful. And any suggestions, always welcome. Anytime. So anytime you need me, emails are great, and we can also catch up on this platform as well. So if you wanted to schedule an appointment, I'm with that. Hours and weekends work for me. So if you wanted to catch up on Collaborate or over the phone, feel free to send an appointment time through and we can have that conversation. No, thanks, Patricia. That's great feedback. I try and make it as engaging as possible because I know it can be hard online. It can sometimes feel like you're not connected to the subject. So I want us to feel like a cohort and approachable to each other, and make this as a really good student experience, I hope. So through the semester, I'll try and collect feedback from you guys, and we'll try and keep improving that engagement as we go. And of course, any questions that you want to be spoken about, problems and address as well. So had difficulty opening Collaborate via Canvas, but you could open the link, I guess, in the announcement. When you went into the Collaborate Ultra, did you have a white screen and then at the top a business and corporations law type of, and then three dots? Were you able to click on the 3 dots? Was it just a black screen and then it just span out? Was there anything blocking? So in your browser bar, is there like a little red flag or something that might be blocking pop-ups, for example? Sometimes that can cause that. But if it's still a problem that's reoccurring, we'll definitely look into it and see if it's a technical thing on our side. Anyway, see how you go, and if it's apologies, Hamid, I didn't realise it was not working too well. Is that better now? Or I guess that's a good point. Did anyone else have a similar difficulty? Unfortunately, yeah, if you've got an internet connection that's not great, it can be difficult. But the session is recorded, and the face-to-face students will also have a very similar lecture in terms of I'll go through this content with them. So I'll have a recording of that as well that you can look back at any time. But in the interim, the course guide is the source of truth. So if you get a chance to read through that, that covers most of the stuff. But obviously, it's more fun to go through a lecture like this with verbal. So sorry that didn't work for you. It's not nice when it doesn't work. Anytime. That's what we're here for. We're a team business and corporations law. So I'm here to help you guys through the semester. We're to take that, and together we'll get there. Anytime. I'll hang around for a couple more minutes, but feel free to enjoy the rest of your night of what's left of it. Gets away from us these days. I'm sure a lot of you have got other work or other commitments tomorrow. It never stops. And I appreciate your time tonight to attend this.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, Patricia. Have a great night and great evening.
You. Great. Thank you. Bye.
So when you raised your hand, I think that automatically turned your microphone on. So that was good to see that function.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, just
Awesome.
typing. I was
Thank
just
you.
Yay.
Have a great night.
You too, you will. Bye.
Bye. So yeah, Hamid, have a great night.